During our time in Warsaw, we conducted hours upon hours of interviews with over a dozen developers about the history of this company and this franchise. We know there are die-hard fans out there who would love to know every question we asked, so we'll have more to show you in extended interview cuts in the not-so-distant future. But to round off our 6-part series, we wanted to dive into some specific areas of design we'd not yet talked about.
We've covered a lot in this series, everything from location design to quest design, localization, and plenty more. But to make a game the scope of The Witcher 3, you need so many more elements working together in tandem. So today we're going to dive into some of that finery and talk about how music, combat design, and cutscene direction all contributed to make the wonderful role-playing game that is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt.
My name is Marcin Przybyłowicz. Good luck with that. And I'm a composer and music director here at CD Projekt Red. We kind of knew that since we are fading away from those grand storylines from The Witcher 2, where you had kings, fighting, politics, wars, all the stuff, going back to the roots of the franchise, so personal, intimate story of Geralt of Rivia. We kind of knew that even though we liked how Witcher 2 sounded like, our entry point would be Witcher 1. Perhaps smaller sound in terms of how many players in the orchestra we would have. We would make greater use out of folk music in general. Well, actually that smaller thing didn't work out very good because that was our plan, but if you listen to the Witcher 3 soundtrack now, it's fucking ballsy. It's you know, it sounds big, right? And it has this large orchestra. It has those well, we call it medieval rock basically.
Right.
Even sometimes hard rock, heavy metal on folk instruments. The one thing is what you plan, and the other thing is what does come out of this. For me, the first part was to find the essence of the sound, because nowadays video games, with some exceptions obviously, like the newest Doom for example, which sounds completely different than other mainstream titles, but in general all the video games are a bit similar to movies, so you might expect certain type of sound with obviously some additions, but the core would remain the same, so symphonic orchestra. The whole effort went to find those ingredients, those tiny elements that would tell everyone around that this is ours, this is us. These are the things that differentiate us from the others. So then again, the moment now when I'm speaking about this, it sounds and feel obvious, like the obvious choice, and probably what's the big deal, right? Just hire folk musicians when you're doing fantasy game about, you know, inspired by Slavic myths.
Marcin Przybyłowicz joined CDP as a sound designer 7 years ago, and as he took the reins on constructing the music for Wild Hunt, he understood that he needed to create a sound that both appeased series fans and broke new ground. He reached out to Polish folk band Percival, named after a character from Sapkowski's series, to collaborate on the project, and much to his delight, they agreed.
We did use some of their already existing songs, which are for the most part modern renditions of traditional Polish, Ukrainian, Hungarian, Latvian, Slovakian, you name it, folk songs, folklore songs. But the majority of the material we did is our own custom stuff we did specifically for the game. I still remember our first recording session when I had sheet music written down, spreadsheets, all the notes gathered. I learned about their instruments, the playing techniques, all the stuff I needed to know to direct the session. And suddenly I found out that half of the band doesn't know how to read sheet music.
Oh, wow.
Because they do not need it. It turned out both them and me like to improvise. So basically most of the music we did for The Witcher were jam sessions.
I'm fascinated as an English speaker. What the fuck are they singing?
You're gonna be surprised. If I recall correctly, none of the songs actually sings about war or beating up people or aggression or whatever. So The Widowmaker is about loving a girl. So this is one of the Skellige combat tracks. The Song of the Sword Dancer, which plays on the north part of No Man's Land, east of Novigrad, is actually a wedding song.
Right.
It's a Croatian wedding song. Wedding guest sings in favor to honor the bride and the groom.
Okay.
And that is the part of Croatian tradition.
Another key element of the game's audio is of course sound effects, and the team went to no small effort to record everything from weapon noises to animal sounds and much, much more. And when they couldn't record it directly, they just asked members of the development team to moan into microphones.
Okay, do a couple more and we'll be good.
Yeah, that's for a sex scene. We'll have more on that later. Anyway, we talked a lot about quests and adaptation in the previous videos, but the writing department at CD Projekt is responsible for not only writing dialogue for each quest, but much of the literature and folklore found in the game. Marcin Blaha has worked on every single Witcher game and was lead writer on Wild Hunt and story director on both expansion packs.
It's like writing a book that when you are writing a book and you finish it, you can always, cut off like 20% of the book, and the same is with the game. You can always, reduce it, and it's even better.
Right.
And
yeah.
we had it with all our games, especially with The Witcher 1, that we didn't really know how to design this game, so we designed it as a huge game, and it came out that we won't manage to do it. So we reduced it, and we thought, oh, the game will be too short, but we had to finish it. So we were working, and in the end, wow, this game is huge. And the same thing was with The Witcher 3. We didn't expect that this game will be so vast. For example, I loved writing books, especially books about monsters, because each book had this part when you write what people think about this particular monster.
Right.
And so you had to imagine that you are living in this world, living in a small cottage at the outskirts of Zima, and what do you think about drowners? Okay, so what do I think about drowners? And that was pretty cool. You had to go inside this world and think about its elements like an insider. At the end of the production, it came out that we wrote too many dialogue lines.
Right.
Each side quest could only have 250 lines.
Right.
You can use a line to say thank you, or you can use your line to make a monologue. Writers were working like crazy, to fit to the limit. They did a good thing for us. They inspired this spark of creativity. We had to think about those stories again. Sometimes we had to reduce them, and sometimes we had to make it much simpler. But then again, it came out that they are still fun, they are still entertaining. We had writing team, 5 people in Warsaw and 2 people in Krakow. And when we started to work on The Witcher 3, we had brainstorms and we were discussing everything to make this, this outline for the game. And later on, we had another division, quests, and we had those pairs, a quest designer and a writer, and later on a cinematic artist, because each dialogue was, directed by a cinematic artist.
One crucial part of the storytelling prowess of Wild Hunt is its cinematic direction. As Marcin pointed out, each quest had an associated cinematic artist. This cinematic team was responsible not only for all the game's cutscenes, but for the way the game's cinematic dialogue system worked.
When there's something happening, you just want to show that. Right. So you're just placing the camera to show the action in the best possible way. It's almost driven by action. That's why shooting action scenes is so easy, because you're just showing the action. It's difficult for animators maybe, because there's a lot of contact and so on. But animation is, combat is easy because there's a lot of motion. You just follow it with the camera, set cool angles, edit it. It's fun. It's fun and easy. The difficult cinematics are the ones where nothing happens.
Most of the game's one-on-one conversations are directed by an automated system that cuts between 2 or 3 angles. It does this based on the voice file in each scene. But to show us how custom scenes are directed, I wanted Pavel to give me an example, so I might as well go with the infamous scene depicted on his t-shirt.
So the scene was supposed to show a relationship with Yennefer without a lot of expositions in a dialogue. How can we show that Yennefer is a sorceress? So I thought, okay, maybe she's creating a magical crab which pinches Geralt in the crotch. We also wanted to show Geralt in this vulnerable, chilled situation as a contrast to what we saw before in the cinematics. Just to show how Geralt is vulnerable, I want to be between his legs, like I could pinch him. So just to do it, I placed the camera between his legs. I also made him scratch his foot with the other foot.
Yes.
So it's like a thing you've never seen him before, and very intimate, very naturalistic also.
To bring these scenes to life, the team worked on a motion capture studio on location for months, recording data for combat, conversations, facial capture, performance capture, and much, much more.
I know which one was difficult. The one in the prologue where Geralt and Yennefer were chased by Wild Hunt for the first time.
Right.
A lot of horses, a lot of people, and the location involved was huge. So problems with strings, so a lot of technical issues. The scene was long. It was a challenge. This one was a challenge. Each scene with a lot of people, a lot of action, and custom animation is a challenge. That is a challenge.
Do you mocap the sex scenes?
Yeah. In each game.
Personally. Hard to pull off, especially in a video game when it's.
Yeah. Especially that you're walking on this thin line of being cheesy,
right,
and pornographic, explicit and romantic. Like, to show intimacy, you have to get close with the camera.
Right.
If you get close to the camera, the animation has to be perfect. The model has to be perfect. So the character director will come to you and say, this looks like shit. I want you to change the camera, move it away, because my model looks like shit. And I'm like, no, I have to show it up close and blah, blah, blah.
The combat in the Witcher series has changed with each iteration, and in so doing, created a fractured fanbase when it comes to how they should play. For one fan, the only way to get his personal perfect version of The Witcher was to mod the original game. In fact, Andre was so successful he even had his mods included on the Platinum edition of the game. This work would eventually score him a job at CD Projekt. But even after The Witcher 2 was released, a game that he had worked on, his passion for modding wouldn't relent, so he modded that one too.
Well, some of the issues that I had personally with The Witcher 2, I was trying to experiment, trying to change the rules. I tried to make Geralt more mobile because you had the roll maneuver to avoid enemy attack, but when you were using block stance, you had to be static, so you weren't able to parry enemy attacks while moving, and I tried to change that. That was the core idea behind it, which made the game more dynamic because you were able to move constantly on the battlefield instead of just staying in place and holding your sword and waiting for an enemy to come to you and attack you.
So it sounds like a lot of those things that you were modding, introducing into The Witcher 2's combat, manifested in 3. I mean, there's like 2 different types of evading
Yes.
in 3, and backstabbing again is really fun.
Well, The Witcher 3, it was based on the Witcher 2 combat. Obviously, the Witcher 2 was taken as at the beginning of production. We started with everything that we had in The Witcher 2,
Right.
and we are trying to improve on top of it. There's obviously roll, which is already present in Witcher 2, but like we were aware that roll was like player's favorite in Witcher, and everyone kept rolling and rolling. So we tried to, while we wanted the player character to still be mobile, we wanted to make sure that this isn't the only valid option, and there are other options which are equally efficient and valid for different kinds of opponents. So that's the main difference, that we have also this short dodge and more effective and convenient for the player pairing. Behind every monster we had this kind of lore and setting that they have their own environment, they have their own day and night cycle. As a side note, we had the same for when we were placing herbs on the location with different plants that Geralt is gathering. Like all of them were introduced to the game with like guidelines. This one is growing on a like good fertilized ground. This one is in a dry environment. This one is in humid. This one is growing on the walls.
A combat system that allows you to fight large groups requires an AI system that can help create fair, enjoyable combat scenarios. And it turns out much of the AI directing groups of bandits also directs groups of wolves and monsters.
We had group enemies, so group enemies, they were supposed to cooperate with each other, and they're supposed to have this pack feeling. They are supposed to take like into consideration each other, like their own positioning. So they try to surround you, they try to stay at some distance. So few of them will come closer, few of them will attack. The others will stay back and will throw insults at you. And other will stay with a crossbow and keep shooting at you. This is one of the examples because all of the enemies that work in groups have this kind of behavior. Wolves, for example, have a pack leader that they are following. Wolves usually are also circling the player, and one comes in to attack you. But when you hit them, they all get frightened, and suddenly you can see a pack of wolves just running away from you, and then they turn around and like repeat the attack. But the same kind of ideas, the same kind of patterns with group behaviors are used for different kinds of enemies, for humans and for neckers, for example, for harpies. All of them like exist in higher numbers. Right. Even wraiths, specters. They're also when they are they have different kind of behavior when they are alone and when they are in groups. So when they're in groups, they also one is like phasing out and phasing in to attack you, while others stay at the longer range. And the more there are, the more dynamic is the fight, because they like switch between each other, like with this initiative.
We couldn't possibly do a Witcher video without mentioning the infamous card collecting game Gwent, so we checked back in with Matthias. Previously lead quest designer on The Witcher 3, he's now principal narrative director on the standalone version of Gwent. Yes, you heard that right, the card game now has its own single player campaign, complete with its own story.
So for Witcher 1 and Witcher 2 we had this dice game, dice poker, and it was pretty cool, we liked it, but we thought, what if we tried to incorporate a card game into the game? Because, there was this card game described in the books, Gwent. It was basically a dwarven game. It wasn't basically a collector game like we did it, but we thought it would be very cool if it was a collectible game. Because then you have a different kind of loot that you could have hidden throughout the game, and different kind of reward, which is not basically part of the main game loop. So then we thought, yeah, it would be really cool to have a card game. But then, of course, there were all these worries that, card games are super complicated to develop, and, it requires a lot of assets. I mean, from the start, we knew that we want this minigame to be a big part of the game. Like, it's one of the activities, and we wanted it to be important to the players. So we thought that it deserves its small, at least, storyline, So it started off small, obviously, as we usually do, and it grew as it went on. The tournament quest actually was one of the simpler things in this whole storyline, because the biggest problem was with the main story characters that you could play with and get cards from. Because obviously our story has choices and consequences. Some of those characters could have died. So then we stumbled upon the problem, well, what happens if Baron died? And, you know, how do you get the card from him then? Right? So then we had to cover all these options as well. I remember for the guy from the prologue, there was the first person that you could play the cards with. There was this guy that was basically traveling, and he wanted to write a book about the war, right? And we thought, well, he's gone after you finish the prologue, so you cannot, you know, obtain the card from him any longer. And we thought, you know, how we could solve this. And the idea was basically that he went on to basically write about war, so he arrived in Velen. And actually, you know, Geralt warned him that if he would go any further, you know, they would kill him for his shoes, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what happens.
Oh, really?
You can find his book, the book he was writing, and the Gwent card he was carrying under the hangman's tree.
Oh,
basically.
no!
That was the idea, yeah.
The hangman's tree that you see when you first arrive?
Yes.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Ah, I'm serious. That's where you can find it. If you didn't play with him, you can find the card there, lying there with the book.
He died quick.
Yeah, well, Geralt warned him, but he didn't listen.
We spent over a week in Warsaw at this studio talking to a broad range of people about the work they do here. Most of them hadn't thought about Wild Hunt in quite a while, as they're hard at work on CD Projekt's next game, Cyberpunk 2077. And that has to be an exciting prospect. The idea that these battle-trained developers made it from the buggy charm of Witcher 1 to the grand storytelling of Witcher 2, all the way to the open-world epic of Wild Hunt. If there's one thing I'm certain of, it's that they won't stop working on their next game until it's reached their own lofty personal expectations.
Well, right now, while I'm playing it, I'm also modding it.
You're kidding! Yeah. What mods are you doing?
I'm also, there are things like that were bothering me.
You can't mod your own game?
But I want to, and I like to, and it's like this, yeah. So, I'm playing. I know how to change stuff in the game, so why not change it? I mean, it's just very subjective things that are immersion breakers for me. Like when I'm with someone that is helping me in combat. For example, I'm in a cave with Kira Metz, and she is a sorceress, and sorceresses are very powerful, like the most powerful entities in the setting. And then we are fighting with monsters, and she's not really helping me. Like she's not doing anything. So she's doing something right now. She's like mopping the floor with everyone right now. Yeah. So it's spectacular. You can just sit at the back and just watch how she's killing everything.
When we were working on The Witcher 1, Assassin's Creed was published, and everybody was excited about this game, and we were watching movies. We were watching YouTube with Assassin's Creed, and Assassin's Creed had this feature. Then you were walking. There was crowd, and you were.
Yeah.
And, wow. And two guys in our company, animator and the programmer, they said, "Okay, we'll do it for The Witcher," and they were working after hours, and they did it. And when it comes to all those tiny details, people are coming up with those details, and they are inventing those tiny ideas. And I think it's an advantage of the way we are working on our games. The only thing that is really important is the result, and if it's good, everything is okay.